Well, hello everybody and welcome from across the globe again to FlightGlobal's fourth in our series of webinars this year, focusing on the vital topic of aviation sustainability. The first three of our webinars this year are available to watch on the FlightGlobal.com website at your leisure, as will this one later. Now, today we're focusing on airline sustainability strategies. My name is Mark Pilling and I'm the contributing editor here at FlightGlobal. And we're partnering on this webinar with Pratt & Whitney, and it's my great pleasure to welcome back Pratt & Whitney's Chief Sustainability Officer, Graham Webb, to represent his business today. Thank you, Graham. We'll introduce you as we go. Here's Graham. Thank you. Now, we do welcome questions from you, our audience, so please post them on the Q&A icon. That would be great, and we'll try and answer as many as we can as we go along, perhaps, but at the end. Now to our expert panel. In addition to our propulsion expert, Graham, I'm delighted to welcome two airline leaders who are driving the decarbonisation strategy at their airlines. Now, and also a consultant who's working with airlines and others across this spectrum, including fuel manufacturers and regulators. So a big hello and a welcome to, first of all, Yvonne Monaghan, who is the Chief Corporate Officer at Wizz Air. Yvonne became a barrister in Ireland in 2007. She joined Ryanair as its general counsel in 2014 and went on to the same role in Vueling in 2018 and moved to Wizz Air this year in July, where she spearheads, amongst other things, legal, corporate governance, regulatory affairs, sustainability, labour relations and government affairs. A massive portfolio, Yvonne, good luck with that. Next, we have Jonathan Council, who is the Group Head of Sustainability at the International Airlines Group, IAG. Hi, Jonathan. He tells me that he's on a cruise ship off the coast of Gibraltar, which is perhaps the coolest place of any of us here. And he's responsibility for the sustainability strategy across the group's IAG's 5 airlines, obviously BA, Aer Lingus, Iberia, Vueling and Level. He's been in his role for 7 years. And before that, he spent 16 years at BA, 8 of those as its head of environment. So Jonathan must be one of the longest serving environmental bosses at an airline group and an airline in the world. Great big welcome to Yashar Yashetskin, who is the Senior Consultant Sustainable Aviation at global consultancy ICF. Welcome Yashar. He's a process chemical engineer by career, by profession as it were, started his career at Turkey's largest petrochemical outfit, Petkim, and he's been in post for a year at ICF, developing sustainable aviation fuel strategies for public and private sector bodies. And he was in Sharm el-Sheikh for COP27 and at the IATA SAF event just in India as well. So I hope you offset all those carbon miles like we all do there, Yashar.
You do.
Finally, you did, of course you did, your ICF did for your on your behalf. And finally, of course, Graham, CSO at Pratt & Whitney. He's been in this post, literally, he tells us that it's his anniversary today in the role, a newly created role at Pratt. He's a 16-year veteran at the company, and he led the development and engineering for the geared turbofan engine program, which obviously Pratt is one of Pratt's cornerstone building blocks of its engine program going forward as well. Now, today the focus is on sustainability, airline sustainability strategy, and perhaps more specifically decarbonisation, which I use quite deliberately after discussions with you. And it's been a year of where airlines have been wrestling with network and balance sheet building as they recover, obviously, from the pandemic, but they're also heavily engaged in building the sustainability, the decarbonisation action plans, mostly from scratch, right? Because nobody had one before. And this is a new business, it's complex, it's expensive, but obviously it's absolutely essential. So I'm going to get our voices in the room to get us started. I'm just going to ask a question. I'm going to start with Yvonne and say, I'd just like to hear from you all. Do you actually have a strategy today, or is it more of a loose cluster of tactics that's going to become a strategy? Yvonne, what's your thought?
Sure. Thanks, Mark, for having Wiz here today to talk about the sustainability strategy. So yes, we do have a very ambitious strategy. And not only do we have a strategy, we actually have a couple of milestones already. So, I mean, as you know, Wizz Air is an ultra low cost carrier. So it's in our DNA to be disruptive and to move really at light speed ahead. So, 2022 has really been an outstanding year for us. And that's in the context of, the very difficult, almost parade of black swan events that we've witnessed, as you've just mentioned, in the last number of years, with the pandemic, with war, and with now inflation. In terms of sustainability, we've really come out as a leader in the area, and that's thanks to a lot of very ambitious, very dedicated employees in Wizz. And it's important to, one fact actually, so the average age of the employee in Wizz is 28. So sustainability is very important for that age group of people. So it's really something that has been embedded into the company. And as I said, 2022 has really been so far, a year for milestones. And I have sitting in my background there 2 CAPA awards from earlier this year. One, the global most environmental airline in 2022, and the same for EMEA. And again, that's thanks to the ambition and dedication of our employees. So in terms of our strategy then, so as you said, we're starting from scratch. So we have to look at it in terms of building blocks. So we have a short-term plan, a medium-term plan, and of course the long-term plan. So right now we're obviously in the short-term phase, and that's really fleet renewal. And the midterm would be looking at sustainable aviation fuels and, offsetting technologies. And then finally, when we look at the long term, that would be investing in new technologies such as hydrogen, and of course, air traffic management as well, which is key in the long term and really needs to move at a faster pace. So in terms then of
Yvonne, can I ask you to because you've actually just given us an agenda. So thank you so much for giving us exactly the agenda I'm going to run through there. And we're going to come on to your action plan and your strategy because with those building blocks, because we talked about that before, and I think that's going to be, these are key. This is the key part. So if you're okay, I'm going to go and ask Jonathan just to sort of bring us into the room as far as IAG is concerned. Thank you, Yvonne.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mark, and good afternoon, everybody. And yes, no, we have a strategy. It's called Flight Path Net Zero. We launched it back in October 2019, and we're very proud to be the first airline in the world to commit to net zero emissions by 2050. And it's quite exciting. We saw that as the first step. After that, working with our One World partners, UK Aviation, European Aviation, IATA, and now ICAO. And it's great to see now that the whole industry is now committed to net zero emissions, as has ICAO. So we are the only sector in the world that have both an industry and a governmental commitment to net zero emissions. So that's great credit to the industry. And then we have obviously the plans to deliver to that, and the typical four pillars: technology, operational efficiency, SAF, and removals. And just a little taster, because I think we'll get more into that. We're very much focused on sustainable aviation fuels. We've set a target of 10% by 2030, which is 1 million tons, which is 10 times more than the global supply today. But we think with the momentum we've seen, it can be achievable. And today we have secured 25% of that. So we've secured 250,000 tons of SAF through contracts, committed contracts, worth $865 million. So we're making big investments to help us reduce our emissions. We're also a supporter of hydrogen. We have 400 short-haul aircraft, so hydrogen we think can play a role there, and we are multi-million-dollar invested in Zero Arbia, the world's leading hydrogen fuel cell power company, which we hope will be running its first test on its Dornier 228 19-seater aircraft quite soon.
Right. Thank you, Jonathan. See, the point I was trying to make is that you guys are sophisticated airlines. You're large airlines. Maybe you have the capacity, and I'm going to ask Yashar a little bit here. So that are we actually seeing strategies here, or is everybody at the same place? How difficult it is to assemble these tactics together? Can we actually call them strategies, Yashar, or what is your thought there? What are you seeing at ICF?
Yeah, sure. I think I would like to start with like our emissions, our flight emissions. I think that was really great that you mentioned, because we actually have this agreement, this SAF certification deal with British Airways, and we were the first management consultancy to do this. So we offset all our emissions, like we fly quite a lot, but through SAF certificates. So we are reducing our emissions, firstly. So as you mentioned, like we work quite a lot with many airlines across the world, and there are different levels of maturity. Let's say, like some of them, for example, like IAG, for example, they have their strategy and commitments as well, and it's quite established. They have their offtakes and everything. But some of them are actually building their strategy. By the way, we are talking about sustainability here, and sustainability will be people, also like the employment and all other aspects of sustainability. But our focus is on, of course, decarbonization. So we support some airlines on building their decarbonization strategy, which will be, if they have a target, for example, sometimes they don't even have a target. So that will be what should be their target based on, for example, maybe SBTI or the industry, for the peer group, for example.
SBTI, let's not SBTI, the science-based target initiative.
Yes. So yes, exactly. Yeah. So whether they will commit to this, for example, or they will just be more ambitious and build their own target, or for example, the Clean Skies for Tomorrow initiative of the World Economic Forum. So setting the target at for some airlines, and then also translating this into a roadmap with different scenarios to show them how can they achieve these targets, as mentioned earlier, how much SAF would it make, or where they should uplift the SAF from, the cost associated with it and everything. So just to wrap up, I think again, there's a level of maturity. Some airlines are already developing their strategies. Some, they don't have a strategy yet. And some of them they have their strategies, and now they are through offtake agreements trying to secure SAF to meet their targets.
Thank you, Yashar. And we'll come on to SAF, obviously, as part of the discussion. Graham, what are you seeing, from your business? I mean, your strategy, you own this, you're a new role. It's more than just tactics now, isn't it? It is a strategic imperative, and you feel that, I'm sure. Tell me how Pratt & Whitney thinks about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Pratt & Whitney at our place, we launched our strategy a year ago, and it's smarter, cleaner, greener. And it addresses the aspects of the technologies that are going to be required for enabling the 30 to 35% reduction that the industry is counting on by 2050. And we've got a broad range of technologies that we're working that span across everything from traditional engine efficiency, working on the sustainable aviation fuel in terms of enabling the existing blends that we have, which we've been working for 15 years, but also additional processes, additional feedstocks that are going to be required, as well as increasing the blend limits from the current 50%, which is permitted by the specifications, to 100%, which would improve the decarbonization. So we've been working that pretty hard, as well as electrification. We've got a number of demonstrators. We just announced one on Monday with a partnership with MTU, Airbus, our partner, our sister division, Collins and GKN, where we're calling this concept called Switch, where we're working a geared turbofan engine, so a large single aisle size aircraft engine, where we'll integrate electrical power, a hybrid electric system, as well as what we call a wet cycle, or a water enhanced turbofan, where we'll be extracting water from the exhaust and re-injecting it after we pump it up by heating it in the exhaust stream into steam, so that we can actually reduce, inject it into the combustor. And in doing this, we're going to achieve an overall 25% reduction. So, kind of a big announcement, and it couples well with our high site concept, which is a hydrogen burning. The Switch is focused on kerosene. So we now have two concepts that working on two different fuels. And at the same time, as I've mentioned, we're working hybrid electric very hard. So broad range of technical investment and technical activities going on, while at the same time working on developing the capabilities with SAF, and then cleaning our own operations up, going to increasing the number of lead facilities that we have and reducing our overall greenhouse gas footprint operationally. So tons of activity in the past year, and happy to see that the industry overall is making progress. I mean, I can clearly see that in the discussions that we're having with all the airlines here on the call today, as well as the ones that aren't. And as Yasser brought up, the maturity curve is starting to bend in the upward direction, which is what we all need.
No, thank you, Graham. Appreciate that insight. I mean, I'm going to ask Jonathan now. But let's talk about developing the strategy? I'm going to start with Jonathan, and I'm going to ask Yvonne, because I think, you know, you're obviously at different stages of getting organised, as it were. So Jonathan, from your experience, what does getting organised mean in a business like, well, BA and then IAG? You know, what expertise do you need? What teams do you need? How many people do you need? You know, what different sort of expertise, etc. Just what's your observation since you've been doing this, Jonathan?
No, absolutely, and it's a combination of resource, but equally importantly, governance. So, and that's something we've focused on a lot, and I'll talk a bit about what I mean there. But yeah, because essentially, I think what we've transitioned from, typically sustainability functions within airlines were like remote organizations, not really connected into the core business processes and the governance of the organization. That has changed. I think there's a general recognition that, you know, sustainability has to be a core part of every airline strategy. I mean, it's our license to grow. We will not be able to grow if we don't get sustainability right. And so in terms of the governance, it's making sure. So for us, it was about linking into the business planning and strategic planning processes. So all of our medium, and long-term, short, medium, long-term thinking has to include consideration of sustainability. That's quick to say, it takes a long time to organize. So it's taken us 5 years to get fully embedded to those core processes. And then governance, making sure, so we have at IAG, we have a sustainability steering group. So we have 9 businesses across the organization. We have a single point of accountability. So we have a director that owns sustainability in each of those 9 businesses, and that group meets essentially every 2 months. And then that feeds into our management committee, which is all our CEOs across our business, and then that feeds into our board. And I guess one of the big changes at IAG that we've seen in the last 2 years, we now have a dedicated board subcommittee on sustainability. So, and I think that is my sense is every airline should have that, because we used to be part of the audit committee, you know, and an audit committee's got a massive range of subjects to cover, so you don't really get into detailed conversations and strategies. But having a separate board committee has made a huge difference to us in terms of getting board commitment and investment. And then coming on to resources, so typically it started off compliance. So sustainability is a lot of regulation, particularly on things like the EU emissions trading scheme, UK emissions trading scheme. So that's typically where the resources come from. But now we need, beyond that, we need people that can understand the offset markets, understand carbon removals. We need technology experts as well. So we're investing in hydrogen companies and so on. So we need some engineers. But probably the biggest priority for us is sustainable aviation fuels. So we're really ramping up our SAF program, and we just need people that are able to understand that market and can negotiate those deals, because they're very complicated. You know, doing a fuel deal, you can do a jet fuel deal in an afternoon. It's very straightforward as a commodity. A SAF deal takes 9 months. It's very complicated. There's so many regulations that you have to meet, and typically it will require investment. You're going to have to invest in that company because they're generally startup type organizations. So, and it's challenging because there's not much expertise out there. So across our business, we have about 35 people involved in sustainability across the 9 businesses, and we have a central team that coordinates all of that IAG strategy and plans.
Jonathan, brilliant insight. Yvonne, you know, what's your experience at Wizz Air? Because, you know, we were discussing this before, but, you know, you've got your plan, and, you know, please tell us about it.
Yes, we have a plan, but with a very lean team. So it's amazing what you can achieve, you know, with really a lot of passion and drive to embed sustainability into all practices of the airline. So similar to what Jonathan has said, we have very good governance in place, right up to the board level, where we have a subcommittee as well dedicated to sustainability and culture, and we meet every 2 months. Then within the organization, really this is a cross-functional platform at the moment, where every business unit within the company is, you know, working on sustainability initiatives. So if you take the fleet department, for example, I mean, this is really at the heart of our strategy, our fleet renewal. So the Wizz Air has the Wizz Air 500 strategy. So we aim to have 500 aircraft by 2030. Currently, we have 173 aircraft, and I think we delivered about 21 already so far. And that aircraft is the A321neo aircraft with the Pratt & Whitney GTF engines. And so with that aircraft, that particular aircraft, I mean, just to give an example how investing in technology is really the way forward, certainly in the short term, and the results, the numbers and what we've seen deploying this A321 technology. So our carbon emission per passenger kilometre currently is the lowest in the industry at last month was 53.4 grams. So our closest competitor, their ambition for 2030 is 60 grams. And then if you just look at the aircraft itself, it's got a reduced fuel burn of 25%, noise reduction of 43%. So really, you know, the fleet team is really looking at this as a key driver. And as a result, because of this fleet renewal that we've done, replacing the older aircraft with the A321neo, our average fleet age is now 4.6 years. So that's one example. Then, of course, we have the purchasing department. So they're currently making agreements, memorandum of understanding in relation to SAF projects. Similar again to what Jonathan has stated. And then, of course, we have our finance team, and they're looking at investing in different equity in different technologies again, in SAF. And that's really the way forward. It's cross-functional, it's everybody's involved, and it's all hands on deck.
And how big is your team at the moment, Yvonne? Just and how, because you are growing it, but it's still lean, as you say. But just give us the numbers.
The fantastic sustainability team, and really their credit, is a team of 2 people, believe it or not.
Yeah, we believe it. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, and this is something that is just going to be embedded into our worlds, into your worlds. You talk about fleet renewal, and obviously this is manna from heaven for Graham and obviously the manufacturers, the OEMs, because they can talk about decarbonisation just by selling more products. Hello, what a great world. So congratulations. One of the things about the action plan, because I think it's really interesting as you describe, Jonathan and Yvonne, on the strategy. I'm going to ask you, Yashar, and then I'm going to ask everybody to chip in. The action plan, we talked about what the credible action plan consists of, but how credible are they, Yashar? Just as you look at them and as you work with airlines, you know, what are the questions airlines ask you most, the most difficult ones, when they try or they look to get their action plan going?
So I think it does also vary, because some of them, they don't even have their target, as I mentioned. So they try to understand what should be our target, which is, for example, net zero by 2050. This is like an industry benchmark and everything. But then do we need to go beyond this? Or if net zero by 2050, what would this mean by 2030? How much SAF would this mean? Or like how much, for example, how would our fleet removal system would actually contribute to this? And also, of course, the cost of the investment, like how much SAF we need, what will be the cost of this uplifting that much SAF for us. And that will also, something associated with this would also be where they will just uplift this SAF from, which airport, for example, or which regulations will be affecting them from the cost perspective again. And also, of course, the policy market, like the mandates and, you know, where they really need to reduce their emissions, to which level is also very key for them. Yeah, very briefly, I think this is one of the key questions.
Right, no, absolutely. I mean, and Yvonne, just, you know, I know you're formulating your sort of detailed action plan, just tell us a bit about the horizon on that, because 2050 seems so nebulous and so far away. You know, credibility is all about having a plan which is staged. Can you just describe a little bit about your thinking and how you're putting that together?
Sure. Well, we haven't published a 2050 strategy yet, you know, because what you said, you have to think about the credibility, because right now it's, you know, looking at 2050 is really a modeling exercise. It's hard to know what's going to happen in the next couple of years. If anything, is to go by what we've just been through in the last number of years. So in terms of the plan going forward, we think that making an interim commitment for 2035 is realistic for now. So this is going back to the building blocks argument, and we're committed to SBTI standards and the initiatives there, and we're working with them at the moment, and next year we'll be able to publish more on the roadmap, which will be very thoughtful and will take into consideration all of the initiatives that I've mentioned previously. So fleet renewal, investment in SAF, equity, and of course on the long-term hydrogen as well, because of course we have a memorandum of understanding with Airbus for the Zero-E project, but of course that's a long way down the line yet. So we're not taking into consideration carbon offsetting for now. It's really driven by carbon emission intensity at this stage.
No, hearing what you're saying there, Yvonne, thank you. So I think Yvonne set it out at the start, and you've all mentioned it. Yashar has mentioned it as well. Obviously, the building blocks are pretty well known to some extent, but let's dig into them a little bit more, because SAF clearly is going to be a key component. I'm going to ask you, Jonathan, just to talk about how you think about SAF and just building up what you need, how much, by when, and how difficult that is, just not in terms of the policy side, but maybe just in terms of where can you get it, who is going to actually, who can you work with now to make that commitment, if you like.
Sure. So let me start off. So where are we today on SAF? So the level of supply is relatively low. It's less than 0.1%, 150,000 tons, 500 airlines, but we are seeing huge momentum. So when I look at the 10% by 2030, so that's 30 million tons, 300 plants, $250 billion of investment. You've now got the US government committed to that, UK government, One World Alliance, and many of the major airlines are now setting a 10% by 2030. Can we get there? We believe absolutely we can. The beauty of SAF is there are 8. There's not one product. There's 8 different pathways. So there's different types of feedstock and there's different technologies. So essentially, most countries could find a pathway that will work for them. But the absolute, so that's why it's important. There are a number of suppliers out there. We need more. Across the world, the last count I looked at, there are about 70 SAF plants in planning. Yeah, so there's about 30 in Europe. The remainder, most of the remainder, are in the US, and then there's a few dotted around the world. So there is activity taking place, but the absolute key to make this happen is policy support. We've seen great progress in the US with we've got a very attractive policy framework in California. Now we've got the Inflation Reduction Act that's on top of that. And the numbers I saw is that's equivalent to $400 billion of investment support over the next 7 years. So definitely the US is in the lead there. In Europe, we've got the mandate. Now, mandates are important because they create demand, but they don't create investment. So we need supporting policy with that, which we're talking to the EU on. They've got a SAF allowance scheme. Ideally, we'd like something like a contracts for difference, which is a potential. And then the UK is going to set a mandate of 10% by 2030. And again, if we get the price stability mechanism, we think this is absolutely achievable. And the thing is, people say 10%, it's not a lot. Well, it's 100 times more than today, but it's the most difficult. It's the highest risk. Whenever I talk to investors, they say, look, I want to invest in SAF, but not the first plant because it's very risky. I'll come to the second or third. So we think get to 10%, you've proven the business case, then you're on a roll, and you're going to we think you can get to 20% by 2035, and then up to 60% by 2050. And that's, we're now looking, EU is saying it could be 80% by 2050, UK is saying 75%, and I think the US are quite similar. So there's much ambition, I think, around SAF and a lot of momentum.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yvonne, how easy, you've got your first MOU on SAF. I mean, is it really more expensive than Jet A1 today?
Currently, it's 3 times more expensive. And really, the other thing is accessibility. So I'll tell you a good story, a practical example of the accessibility challenges we have at the moment. So Wizz did a demonstration flight, a green demonstration flight, invited by the European Commission in July. So the flight was from Bucharest to Lyon, and it was a SAF demonstration flight. And we left Bucharest airport with no SAF, even though it was a SAF demonstration flight, because there was no SAF available in the area. So we had to fly to Lyon, uplift the SAF in Lyon, and then return back to Bucharest. So that's just a current example of accessibility of SAF. So, I mean, Wizz Air has an airline in Hungary. So our main markets are Central and Eastern Europe. So far we can see that there will be capability for production of SAF in the UK, in the Netherlands, and the Nordics. But in Central and Eastern Europe, there will be challenges, in the near term.
I think that Graham, and maybe, well, Graham first, but this is one of the issues on SAF is that global availability, which is clearly going to be important, and could be a strategic advantage for any country that sort of gets with that program and starts investing in that area.
Yeah, absolutely, and it depends upon the technology. I think that the technologies are needing to be developed, and the availability of the feedstocks. I mean, currently, right now, the majority of the fuel that's being manufactured is from French fry oil, and that's really not, shall we say, going to support us for the long haul. So we really have to see the development of these alternative technologies that make use of things such as agricultural, forestry waste, even municipal solid waste, as well as continued investment in the Holy Grail, which is direct air capture, which would lead to power to liquid fuels. And this is, shall we say, short-term, medium-term, long-term SAF plays, and along the lines of what Jonathan mentioned, where there is some hesitancy in the investment because of the technology maturity. And so obviously, all of the work that we're seeing in terms of mandates, and as well as what we're seeing in the United States with the IRA, the blender's tax credit, are going a long way towards stimulating the demand, or shall we say the investment capability for developing those technologies, maturing them, that will then enable that momentum to build. But it is the key challenge that we face overall as the industry, and we are seeing building momentum as we see the airlines make these commitments. The commitment that that was just mentioned, relative to the SAF buy is quite what is going to drive these investments to occur.
And Yashar, is it important, is it strategically important for airlines to be early, with early access to SAF in quantities? Is that going to be an advantage? I don't just mean, being able to meet your mandates. I mean, actually financially, and maybe, a P&L advantage.
Yeah, so like there has been really great discussions, right? That some of the points, I think I would like to emphasize some of them before moving to this. I think this SAF is an early stage technology at some point, right? And scaling up early stage technologies will require policy support. This is what we see in other early stage technologies as well, like even in carbon capture, for example, or we have seen this in wind and solar as well. So policy support is definitely key here. And also, of course, like airlines, again, they are supporting SAF through these offtake agreements, for example, because then the supplier, the producer, can take this agreement and finance its investment. And regarding the price advantage, the cost price advantage with the early stage, or like for early movers for the airlines. So what we see about this is some of the facilities, some of the offtake agreements. We have been involved in quite a lot of offtake agreements, and for example, a portion of the capacity is sold through offtake agreements, but then a very small portion is left, and this goes with a higher price, for example. So this definitely, so airlines need this because they have to meet their mandated SAF requirements, or they have their own commitments for example, against other mechanisms, their internal their own strategies and targets. So yes, I think like securing SAF today through offtake agreements could provide this advantage, and also the location again could be an advantage, again depending on the region that the airline is operating, but especially in California, of course, like we see lots of incentives. This is the US approach, and because of this approach, because why US is doing this, because SAF is a tool for energy security and job creation, and so many of the SAF production facilities are under development, for example, in this region, right? So they are driving this national GDP contribution through incentives. So we see, I believe, incentives at the early stages of any technology deployment is very key.
Thank you, Yashar. Yeah, no, that's well said. I mean, Yvonne or Jonathan, I mean, early access to SAF, why bother? I mean, okay, you're going to get your mandates. Let's let somebody else develop it. Why do we need to be so stressed right now? Because it's going to be available. Why do we need to make offtakes now, which might be more expensive than they will be in 2028 when we actually need it?
Maybe I can jump in there, and maybe Yvonne, you can follow on. But yeah, no, we see it as absolutely critical, because a lot of these companies are startups, and so for two reasons, and a lot of the SAF deals we're doing, we're required to invest in those companies. So typically, you provide a committed offtake agreement, and SAF deals generally it's a longer offtake period. So it's not a year; it could be 5 or 10 years. So that helps provide the supplier assurance, and also helps them go to the market. And then investing. So a lot of investors have said, you know, before I put my money into a SAF supplier, I want to make sure that the airline has got skin in the game. So i.e. you're not going to walk away from that. So therefore, by us investing means we are fully committed, and they know they've got a committed. And we're very happy to do that because one, we're helping seed the market, we're helping it grow and develop, but also enables us to get access to SAF at very cost competitive prices. So I think it's, you know, incumbent on every airline to get involved, start investing, and help grow this market more quickly. Because one thing we don't have is time when it comes to climate change. Yeah, and we've all seen what's happening, and we're all, I guess, aware that this is happening more quickly than we think. So the faster we can get there, the better.
Yeah, no, there's a question from Shashank Nigam, who does a lot of work in this area. He's sort of along these lines, Yvonne. Maybe just, you know, how do you convince, if you like, you know, your CFO, who I won't. The question is, if he's not a tree hugger, which that's a bit facetious, Shashank. But anyway, how do you convince them at the moment? Is there actually an advantage in doing something earlier at this stage, or what, you know, what's your thought at Wizz?
Of course, I mean, getting in early will give you a competitive, you know, edge, but it also has to be balanced against your company principles. So Wizz Air is an ultra low cost carrier. And so in that case, normally the strategy would not to be the first in everything, but to be the follower. And so in this case, in the case of mandates, the mandates are coming in 2025. So we're waiting to see what the mandates are going to produce, because right now the cost is, you know, prohibitively expensive for our current plans. So we're waiting until we see, you know, what happens closer to the time. We have secured agreements in place. But, you know, that doesn't start until 2023, so 2 years before the mandate, because we still don't even have, well, within the EU, a full definition of what SAF is. So we have to be clever in that regard.
No, sure, and I appreciate your candor. Sorry, Jonathan.
So maybe if I can just add there, so for to answer, again, add something to the question. One of the very important considerations is, of course, emissions trading costs. So, you know, we're part of the EU ETS and the UK ETS, you know, and those prices they've escalated very significantly. So currently around 90 euros a ton, but by 2030, they could be 150 euros a ton. So
this is the price of carbon. This is the price of carbon reduction.
Exactly. So the conversation with our CFO is, how am I going to mitigate that price of carbon? Because it looks like it's, you know, it's a very big number. It's, you know, 8-figure number by the time you get to 2030. Well, one of the ways you do that is through SAF. Yeah, so he's very interested. So I think that in answer to the question, you know, that's the way to engage your finance people is, you know, it's about avoiding future carbon costs.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've talked for years about price escalation at the OEMs, haven't we, Graham? And we don't want another market that's price escalating out of all proportion, do we? Sorry, not that price escalation is it's just one of the issues. Offsetting, there has been a question about this as part of a basket of building blocks. Has it fallen out of favour in terms of your action planning, Jonathan and Yvonne?
Yeah, Yvonne, did you want to answer? I'm
happy
to.
You'd go first.
Well,
maybe, I don't know.
Okay, yeah, no problem. I mean, we absolutely see offsetting as part of the transition. I mean, we are part of CORSIA, so the global carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation, which you know, it was a major milestone for the industry. It's agreed in 2016 at ICAO, and it's now, because of the pandemic, it's slightly delayed implementation, but it will start in 2024. And this is going to enable the industry to basically carbon neutralize its growth in emissions on a 2019 baseline, or in fact 85% in 2019. The criticality with offsetting is the quality of the offsets. The global market, it's over $150 billion, but there is a range of qualities to make sure that as an industry we're only using the highest quality, and that's what ICAO does. They set the standards in terms of the types of offset. They have a technical advisory board, and they have set very robust standards in terms of those offsets. So we as an industry, we will only be using the most robust and sustainable offsets. And I think that's really important. But in the transition, we think that ultimately we want to get to removals, and just sort of a quick, essentially offsets, they reduce CO2 going into the atmosphere. Removals take CO2 out of the atmosphere. I think it's recognized that there's now already too much CO2 in the atmosphere, so we definitely need both. And we think once removals become, currently they're very early stage, they're probably where SAF was 5 years ago, but once they develop and they scale up, we definitely see removals as an important part of the mix as well as offsets.
Yvonne, do you have a view on offsets at the moment about their
Yeah, well, I was just going to pick up on what Jonathan was saying. So I think it's interesting that he mentioned CORSIA because, well, IAG is made up of a number of long-haul operators. And of course, if you really wanted to have a robust sustainability strategy, you would also advocate to extend ETS to international flights. So right now, the biggest polluters, we'll say, are not paying. So that is the long haul flights, and it's the low cost operators and the point-to-point carriers who are, really taking the hit on carbon emissions. So for a level playing field, I think that the long haul carriers should start advocating, if they want to be true to the sustainability strategy, advocating for already applying ETS on those long haul international flights. So
Jonathan, what's your comeback on that?
Well, no, I mean, there's in 2012 the EU attempted to do that, and it was a complete and unmitigated disaster. So much so, leading to China cancelling all their Airbus orders, and the US actually introduced a law making it illegal for US carriers to comply with the EU ETS on extra. And you've talked to anybody in the EU, they said, no, we're not going down that path again, because it's been proven that it would just be unacceptable. So, but I think, so the important point is, yes, we need carbon pricing in long haul flights. Yeah. It's never going to come from the EU, as we've seen through that experience. What we need is CORSIA. Now, we know that CORSIA was a compromise. It's an offset scheme, it's to 2035, and it's over a baseline. But it was worth making that compromise to get the global deal. And I will say it again, we are the only industry that has a global instrument to address climate change. No other industry has that. So absolutely needs to be strengthened. It needs to, we need to make it more effective. And that's why inbuilt within the CORSIA program is a 3-year assessment of how do we make this a stronger scheme. And it's working, because the original baseline on CORSIA was 2020. Okay, we moved to 2019 because of the pandemic, but just at the last ICAO assembly, it's 85% of 2019. So we've lowered the the baseline, and effectively we've gone from carbon neutral growth 2020 to carbon neutral growth 2015. So we've started the scheme 5 years earlier. So absolutely we accept it was a compromise, but it is the only global deal. It's the only thing that will be available to address our international emissions, and we just need to strengthen it.
And I know this is a live issue, as Yvonne is referring to and Jonathan is referring to, because the EU is looking at reforming the ETS and changes right now, and there's lobbying going on. Literally this afternoon, Michael O'Leary is doing a press conference, I think, on it. Probably Joseph might have said something in the CAPA conference, I don't know. Let's just talk about another topic. Thank you for that, your interjections there, everybody. Yes, SAF, brilliant. We've talked offsetting, maybe, whatever, right? New fleet renewal, we've talked about that a lot. Of course, and then we talk about actually, the zero emission aircraft of the future. This is part of your action plans, but way out there kind of thing. And I'm going to ask Graham just to sort of talk a bit, in a nutshell, if you like. Developments are coming thick and fast. Are they going to be, what are we going to see when, Graham? I know it's a big question, but are we moving towards programs, aircraft that these guys here can actually field in a useful time frame to be part of their building blocks to decarbonisation?
Yeah, that's a real challenging question and a very good one, Mark.
You want that
aspect, because when you look at, I would say, the commercial transport and wide body aircraft that really generate the majority of the emissions, the energy required to power those aircraft is significantly greater than what current technologies can provide, whether they be electrical batteries or even hybrid electric solutions, because of the battery energy density limitations. Yeah, and as we start looking at hydrogen, of course, as another energy storage medium, there are challenges there. It's cryogenic, minus 253 degrees centigrade, and requires a whole new infrastructure for refueling of the aircraft. And so, quite a large amount of effort for these alternative applications to, in terms of technology maturity, certification, safety. These are all critical elements that have to be developed. And so, to specify a precise timeline is extremely difficult. I think, right now there's aspirations that, would enable us to see perhaps a hydrogen fuel cell powered aircraft in as early as 2035, but that would be subject to the availability of infrastructure that would enable the support of a fleet of aircraft amongst a viable amount of city pairs. And certainly building up that infrastructure globally is going to take, several decades, beyond 2035 until that's established. Right now, I would state battery energy density is about 250 watt hour per kilogram, which is okay for really small aircraft. I mean, we can make some of those work, but they're not really going to move the needle on the sustainability without tremendous increases in that capacity. And obviously that then drives us into the hybrid electric space, which is where we're actively working, that enables us to really combine the best of all worlds to decarbonize our future generation of aircraft as this technology matures. And so, what you're going to see is that there will be an evolution from small to large as these technologies develop and as the infrastructure come into place. But, I'd have to state it's going to take decades before those will be available widely at the size class that we need, single aisle and wide body aircraft, to move the needle on decarbonization from a technical perspective beyond what we're already committing to, which is a 35% reduction through, I will call it the technologies that we know today predominantly, engine efficiency improvements, aircraft efficiency improvements that will be introduced in the next generation aircraft that we would anticipate would occur in, say, 2035 to 2050.
No, it's well said, Graham. And I don't apologise for the hard question because I know that you can answer them. But I mean, Yvonne and Jonathan, just as an airline, what do you think about it here? Do you just go, well, do you know what? We'll do a couple of PR things and we'll support this project, we'll support that. Maybe we'll put a little bit of money into Zero Avia over there, Jonathan, just to keep them going and keep it. But actually, you don't really care right now, do you? It's let other people do the work. People like Pratt & Whitney, they're right on this. This is what they do for a living. What do you think?
I would disagree, Mark. I think that people really want to accelerate the future right now. So take, for instance, at the moment, we've just become a member of ASEA, so the Alliance for Zero Emission Aviation. And that's across the industry. So it's got manufacturers, airlines, new startups, a lot of different stakeholders who want to already collaborate, share knowledge, share experience, and try to accelerate, hydrogen technology in this case. And you see that across the industry in other forms as well. So there's also a renewable fuels alliance set up by the European Commission as well. So it's not really, a PR thing. It's really a case of, as Greta Thunberg would say, the house is on fire. We need to do something about it. So you want to get the best people in the industry together and put heads together and come up with a proper strategy for the future.
Jonathan, thank you.
I agree.
Really well said. Well said.
I agree entirely, and it's back to the point I was making on SEF. We just don't have time. So the normal evolution of maybe these new technologies might take 15, 20 years. We just don't have that time, that luxury with climate change. So that's why we're looking at the market, and we'll put money in. We made a multi-million-dollar, so it's not a bit of money, it's quite a significant contribution into Zero Avia, because we think it's a very promising technology and we just want to help them get there quicker, because then that'll help all of us. So I think airlines, they need to actively invest in some of these solutions, because we've got to start reducing our emissions.
No, okay, absolutely. Graham, do you see good support coming from your airline customers today? They want to get involved, they want to take part?
Absolutely. I mean, I think as you're seeing today, there's a number of the airlines they're really feeling the need to drive sustainability at a faster pace than what we can deliver as an industry. And so obviously we have a lot of discussions about how we can improve upon, what they already have with the products that they already have today through, modifications, retrofits, and upgrades, which is, what we focus on to enable the pull-in of the near term as we continue to work on these longer range technologies that are going to take more effort, because of the complexities that I mentioned previously. So, definitely seeing that input coming from a variety of perspectives from around the globe. And, we're, shall we say, integrating all of that, and supporting them predominantly right now with the sale of geared turbofan engines, GTFs, which, I think Yvonne is, basically all of these folks are proud customers of ours. So, we're, continuing to drive what we can do near term, with the, we have an Advantage engine that's going to come out next year that will offer an additional 1% improvement, for deliveries that will occur there. So, continuing to take in the feedback from our customers and working to support them on the areas that we can with respect to improvements in efficiency, which reduce fuel burn and reduce fuel consumption, but as well in terms of enabling them to understand SAF, because there's a lot of airlines who are not fully educated on what SAF is and whether it's compatible with existing airline and engine capabilities or technologies, and then what the future is going to bring so that they can develop the plans that, were discussed previously with a technical basis of knowledge that, breeds, shall we say, the confidence that if they were to go for SAF, that we're, as a manufacturer, not going to stand up and say, oh, no, you can't burn that fuel. We're working with them across the board on all of these elements.
Mm. No, absolutely. Well, thank you for that update, Graham. Really appreciate that. Yeah, sure. I'm going to ask you just as we come towards the sort of conclusion. We've talked about the technology, the building blocks, the plans, the teams you're going to need. Okay, what's it all going to cost, right? When you think about decarbonisation costs, the people that you talk to, how do you forecast? And we'll ask the airline colleagues in a sense. How do you forecast what this costs? And I know people will say, well, it's going to cost what it's going to cost because there's a global imperative, right? But what about decarbonisation costs?
I think this is almost like the $1 million question. This is one of the challenges, the uncertainty that we see across the industry, of course. And when we forecast everything for 2030, as Ivan was mentioning, for example, the current cost, the current price, the cost is lower, let's say currently, but then the current price is very high because of the lack of supply in the market today. So, and when we look at the models and forecasts by 2030, there may also be some supply gap currently. So that will also drive the prices higher. But then the costs are well understood for HEFA, for example. But then in HEFA,
which is one of the types of SAF, right?
Yeah, one of the
current.
Yeah, which is exactly the current technology, like
current standard.
Exactly. Yeah, it is the most basic technology that we are using today for SAF production. And even in SAF, even in HEFA, we see that the feedstock drives the cost quite a lot, and the feedstock market is getting really challenging. Let's say there are lots
we've
of.
We've all got to eat a lot more fried food, right?
Yeah. Super Bowl's coming. We need the chicken wings.
Yeah, exactly. But then also, I think very interestingly, power to liquids, for example, is a technology that was not maybe a year ago, for example. It was more like a future technology, like hydrogen, for example. But today there are quite a number of PTL deployments around the world, like PTL announcements and facilities under development. Let's say there is no operating large-scale facility, of course. But then things evolve quite quickly, and even for PTL, the cost expectations are even reducing with the reductions in DAC cost, direct air capture cost, or green hydrogen cost. So there are different elements around the technology itself, like the cost function is a little bit complicated, and other drivers across the world will also drive cost reductions in SAF production. But yeah, it is challenging today, but I think off-take agreements put a number on it a little bit, let's say. So they are also useful in that context as well. So it just provides some level of certainty at least.
Yeah. Jonathan, you're off mute. Does that mean you want to just talk about how you forecast and think about it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We do a lot of modelling. I mean, and one thing's absolutely clear to us: early action will reduce the cost of the decarbonisation transition. But maybe if I can just mention a seminal piece of work that's done by ICAO. So to support their agreement of the long-term aspirational goal, they issued a report in March, And anybody interested in aviation decarbonisation should read this. It's free. It's on the ICAO website. It's the culmination of 2 years' work of 300 global experts. So this is a definitive work on how the industry is going to decarbonise, and it talks about the costs of transition. You know, and they are, the numbers are huge, as you can imagine. So and it depends on the mix, but they're somewhere between $1.5 and $3 trillion for the global aviation industry to deliver net zero emissions. But that's spread over 28 years. Their view is it's less than 10% on ticket prices. And the key is act now. The later you leave it, the bigger the cost. So that's absolutely critical. And for us, the biggest cost is not doing anything, because you won't have an industry. If we don't address our carbon emissions, there will be no flying. So even though it sounds like a lot of money, it's going to earn us our right to continue to fly.
Well, I was going. Oh, my clock's going, so we're not far off the top of the hour. So, just on that note, we're going to sort of just get to the end, and we might take. I've been checking the Q&A, and so I think we've answered quite a few questions as we've gone along. So hopefully, so listeners, that you have been satisfied with that. With that. But just finally, I mean, following up on your point there, Jonathan. With all this action, and there is definitely acceleration. You can see it, we read it, we can, and you guys are all practitioners and experts in it. If we can't get this right, if we can't decarbonize that, will we have to fly less? Is this something that you as airline people, as industry people, wake up in a bit of a cold sweat about, or do you think you'll be retired by then, so you don't care? But will demand actually be impacted at some point?
Well, our view is it's carbon that's the enemy, not flying, and it's very clear, that the benefits that flying brings are multiples of the disbenefit of the carbon. So let's focus on the carbon. As you've seen, there are plenty of solutions out there to address that. So and there's I think there's quite a lot of questions around, because there's a lot of major airlines that are moving fast on this, but there's a lot of smaller airlines that are not. But if I can just give a plug maybe to IATA, are doing a lot of work in this area. I think there's a question around, where do I start with sustainable aviation fuels? Well, IATA are setting up a SAF center, so basically supporting airlines with their sustainable strategies, but also on sustainable aviation fuels. ICAO, there's many resources out there that all, airlines, if they're not progressing on this journey, please use these resources, because we all need to do this together. We can't just rely on just a few major airlines.
No, okay, good point. Yashar, what's your thought in terms of ICF, and your personal, of course?
We see an increasing and massive demand in the market for the SAF. Again, when we say sustainability for the airlines, it is mostly just driven down with decarbonization strategies for us, and we see SAF there quite a lot. Lots of offtake agreements coming along. We are also working quite a lot, like due diligence assessments again on behalf of airlines. So I think the next year will definitely be all down the road. We will probably see more implementation, maybe more announcements again, and just keeping the ball rolling, actually.
Graham, do you at Pratt & Whitney, when you look at the scenarios, you look at forecasting, nobody really, obviously you don't want to see the growth in air transport curbed by any sense or stretch, but is it something that you talk about, that you even worry about at times?
Well, I mean, I guess, as was communicated, all the evaluations that we conduct, at the industry level relative to, forecasting how the industry will evolve and develop over time, we definitely see that there will be an increase in ticket prices, and that's going to have, some impact on flight volume over time as we start to introduce these new technologies and these more expensive fuels. So we definitely take that into account. And I think that's built into a lot of, I would say, all of the folks that we're looking at this is strategic plans relative to how they see the development. Do we see that this is going to go to zero? No, because we have a history of innovation in our industry. I mean, you look at what we've done over the past almost 100 years with aviation, it's been phenomenal in terms of the level of efficiencies, the range that we're able to develop. And so as you fast forward, with the level of investment and the level of focus that the entire industry is placing on this, I don't think that we're going to fail. I think we will succeed. I think it's going to take time, and the momentum will have to build. And certainly that's how we forecast it, at Pratt & Whitney.
Yvonne, the last word goes to you.
Well, I mean, currently we don't see any risk to people not wanting to fly. If anything, we've just seen an increase in demand. And I mean, if we have to thank the pandemic for one thing, the pandemic has shown us that connectivity is crucial. Connectivity is key. You know, we've seen traffic rise by 130% in the Wizz Air network. That's huge since 2019. And obviously we're growing as well. And we don't see any risk at the moment. People are more interested in what's the sustainability strategy? How are you going to counter it? What's the emission intensity? Because we need flying. We need to connect people. We need to connect businesses. And, you know, it's the way forward to just focus on decarbonizing and putting the money and putting the investment into that.
No, well said. And thank you very much, Yvonne, for that sort of nice way of rounding up our discussion about airline sustainability strategies. And I think hopefully everybody's got a really good insight into what you're doing there at Wizz, Yvonne, what IAG is doing with Jonathan, you know, and the work that Yashar is putting in, and Graham, in terms of both the consultancy side and the technology side. So thank you all so much for your contributions. Thank you to the audience for your questions, and to Pratt & Whitney for obviously being the sponsor. This webinar will be on demand shortly, and we'll be doing more of these webinars on different topics, or maybe same but expanded, next year. February, I think, is going to be our first one. Do look out for those. This one will be available on demand later, and we know that that's a very popular modus operandi for people. So thank you very much, Graham, Yvonne, Jonathan, Yashar. Really appreciate your help. Have a
Pleasure.
good break
You.
when you type your break for a break. You've got another 20 days to go before you can break, by the way. From me, I wish you all a very good day. Goodbye until the next time, everybody. Thank you very much, everybody.